In Class 6, we're going to take a look at the classic console compressors. So these are compressors that were actually part of recording consoles. We have the EMI TG12345. I put it out there in the previous class just because it was probably the first one. There are many people like API who claim to have made the first VCA, but the date line that they give, which was the late 60s, was after the EMI TG12345 VCA. So I don't see exactly how they can claim that. Maybe there's some other technical characteristics that I don't understand. But what we have here is the let's just kind of go through some of them, right? And some of the basic characteristics of them. So let's start with the TG12345. So we started this. This was the first console that actually had compressors built in to each channel, and there were stereo channels. So just the way that you see it here, except all vertical. And some of these there are adaptations here. There were variations of different model numbers of the TG12345. So some had more EQ, some had the EQ in different sections. Waves kind of put it together here, put it all together here. So not all of this all of this stuff exists exactly as shown here, although it's very, very close. And those components maybe have moved from this section to that section, but they're all basically there. And the compression, though, was the first console to ever have compression actually built into each channel. So this is like an amazing development in terms of the evolution of console technology. At Olympic Studios, a company called Pi Telecom used to make a lot of broadcast electronics, and the Pi compressor was used as a broadcast limiter as part of the Helios console, and this was sort of fit right in and used as a program limiter, and could also be used separately and patched into for individual channel processing. So this is like pure solid state electronic compression. The VComp, I don't have a really good visual emulation of the original 2254 Buss Compressor, which was created by Rupert Neve in 1969, I believe. And this was designed by Rupert also as a program limiter, I believe, for radio or broadcasts or television broadcasts. I can't remember which one. I think it was radio broadcasts in England. And this was later adapted and used in the Neve consoles that he came out with, the 80 series consoles. So this was something that could be retrofit into there. A very classic solid state compressor, an all-time classic. We'll get into later on. The Neve Corporation would actually do a variation of this with more settings. API had their 525 compressor limiter, which was built into the channel circuits. Now, because a lot of those 70s consoles were all very modular in design for ease of repair and replacing parts, you could actually select different components, and this later became the 500 series racks that are so popular now that so many companies make components for. And this was a limiter compressor that could be included in the circuit path if you plugged it in to its slot, and you could also patch into them. So you may have the choice between having an EQ in that slot or a compressor in that slot, and you would sort of make those decisions as a part of the layout of the desk itself. But this was their version. This is a VCA compressor, and it's their op amps that were really like the bigger part of the sound or the characteristic sound of the API. But this also has a very unique sound. It's a very functional kind of compression. The Ssl compressor, this is the E series compressor and dynamics. Ssl was the first to have gates in every console channel strip. So they had compressors and gates together. And this is one of those things where someone, well, why would you need gates and compressors on every channel? And then when you have it and you work on a console that has one, it's like, why doesn't every console have these? It's like you can never have too much stuff, and so this is a VCA compressor that is very much based on the DBX VCA design, and except it has separate attack, fast attack, slow attack settings, and variation in terms of not just the ratio, but the release time, which you don't have with the DBX. and it's a very functional, cool compressor, particularly great for drums and things like that. And the gate actually works pretty well. The G channel is just like a variation on that exact same thing. The settings look the same, but the sound is slightly different. Later on, part of those consoles was the SSL Buss Compressor. There was an E-Buss Compressor, G-Buss Compressor, and this is like an all-time classic compressor that many people have used. It just has like, it's a VCA compressor, and it has a classic British sound. And there are just some settings on here that are just money. You've just heard them so many times. When you pop it in and you put it to those settings, it's like, oh, I know that sound. So it's a classic one. We're going to really dig into that. We also have the J series. They sort of made some adaptations, put in a peak limiter into it, and a much cleaner, more transparent compression, whereas the SSL E and G was like much more definitively aggressive. So this was a little bit smoother sounding, as is the gate expander, which added a hold control. So the JK series, they kind of changed those things up, and then they also adapted the Buss Compressor. So this is, although modeled after the G-Buss Compressor, the ratio instead of 10 to 1 is 20 to 1, and it does have a slightly different sonic characteristic. Still a VCA, but cleaner sounding VCA, right? Not as gritty, biting sounding. The 88RS has a compressor built into the circuit. We'll take a look at this. This is also a very transparent compressor that is a little bit tricky to get used to, but once you get through some of the weird settings and the push-pull knobs and all of that sort of stuff, it's a very powerful compressor limiter. And the more modern API console, which has a gate, the 235L, and a compressor, the 225L. So you have a compressor limiter, and this gives you more functional controls than the older consoles. This is a much more recent version of the API compressor. So this is not the 525. This is the 225. And so they are different, and they have some different switch settings. The other, I believe, was only a feedback style compressor. This is a feed forward or feedback style compressor. Has hard soft limit settings, etc. So when we will go through these and the sonic characteristics of this. So that's also a classic. And those are the console type compressors. We're going to dig into that so you can kind of understand what is in the blood and guts of those individual components. This was a big part of the power mixing course, where we went through the individual console types, although that approach went through everything in the circuitry, whereas this is going to focus exclusively on just the compressors. Let's move on to Class 7.